time, perhaps.
So do you want to introduce yourself properly to everybody that's watching?
Tell the world what you do. And
Okay, sure thing. So my name is Ben Veal. I am I wear a few hats on my bald head. I am a public relations practitioner. I am a purpose-driven business owner, and I am a podcast host of a couple of podcasts. One of which is about inspiring people, and the other of which is about professional wrestling. Would you believe?
Oh wow,
Pardon?
That sounds interesting. Professional wrestling.
what is when you mean? Do you mean wrestling as in wrestling, or do you mean professional wrestling as in having a fight with another professional?
I mean sports entertainment, as in WWE.
I didn't know that about you.
Yeah, there you go. Wrestling life. So I have two, because what happened, I have the Good Journeys podcast, which you'll know about, which is all about kind of inspiring people and the lessons they've learned in their lives. And when I started that out, I thought, who are different people from different walks of life I can invite onto the show? And having been a lifelong wrestling fan and having been a journalist in wrestling for quite a few years, I reached out into my little black book to someone I know very well who's kind of came from the UK and has now conquered America. And we had a great conversation. And then before long, I interviewed another wrestler and another wrestler and another wrestler. And so this kind of show, which was supposed to be much like yours, about kind of a real kind of smorgasbord of different people, was suddenly becoming very wrestling focused. So yeah, late last year I split it, and so I now have Wrestling Life. But it's the same kind of thing. It's not talking about storylines of the theatrics. It's talking about the real people that do this. It's talking about mental health. It's talking about struggles they faced in their lives with family, work-life balance. It's about real people in a sport or a form of entertainment that's pretty misunderstood, really. It's kind of one of those things, wrestling, where you say wrestling and people always go, oh, wrestling, like Big Daddy kind of thing. They don't really, but it's a multi-billion-dollar industry that's held together by a very small group of really talented people who are traveling 300 days a year and kind of sacrificing their health and their well-being and their family life to do it. And it's kind of full of rich stories.
That sounds really interesting.
I saw that film on the TV about that young girl that became quite massive, and you could see that just in the whole that whole film about the dynamics of how the wrestling world impacts on your own life as well as other people's lives and your family's lives, and the bigger picture that comes with that. And actually it does look fun and blah blah blah, but there is a reality behind that, and it does take people with it, if you see what I'm saying, and prevents it must break up families. It must make families, but I'm sure it breaks families considerably as well with the pressures that come alongside it.
It's quite an ironic one, really, because a professional wrestler's job is essentially to entertain families. It's they are providing a platform which, more than anything, is about bringing fathers and sons, mothers and daughters, the whole family together on that experience. Yet to do so, they have to leave their own families behind for weeks/months at a time, miss Christmases, miss birthdays, miss holidays, to entertain other people. And then there's the other interesting side of the coin, which is that, unlike the only other thing you can really compare it to is live theatre, because there's no other form of entertainment really where you get that immediate pop and that buzz from someone, from a crowd, and the sheer adrenaline dump that I think a lot of these men and women have to deal with, from maybe having, I can't even imagine it, but having 20, 30, 40, 50,000 people screaming for you, and then you walk back off the stage and you're supposed to then sleep and start your next day really early to go to the next city.
Yeah.
And I think to do that for a lot of people is, I know from these conversations, it's really, really hard to deal with. It's all very well focusing on the highs of wrestling in a big stadium, but what comes after it when you're back to civilian life? I think it's a bit similar to when you speak to people in the armed forces who have struggled with, I can't quite liken the two, but similar kind of thing, that struggle to civilian life when you've been in such a big position. So yeah, it's a fascinating world of conversation.
My youngest son is a DJ and music producer. And we were chatting last night, and he's back home. He's been back home on and off for a while. And we had quite a life-changing thing last year. So he's made more effort to be at home for birthdays, Christmases, because of what happened. And it was important. It's been important for him to be around, both for him and for us as a family. And he's been sick for the last 2 weeks. I mean, like proper sick, like, like coughing really awful, but not like you and I have had it for 3 days. His has been ongoing and still is. And, you look at that lifestyle that people think it's glamorous. You get on an aeroplane and, you fly to America, you fly to New York, and he plays in New York, and then the next night he's playing in Chicago. So he doesn't finish his set till 4:00 in the morning. And then by the time he then hangs around for a little while, gets back to his hotel room, and then he's got to be at the airport for 8:00 in the morning. And it looks glamorous, but it's really hard. And like you said, he's been away from his family virtually all of his life, because that's his career. That's what he does for a living. And I think he's felt that and had to make changes this year to kind of accommodate that, because it's been so tough. But it is, people do have these. It's just a small section of people's lives, isn't it? But for the professionals, it's not. It's their life. It's their profession. Absolutely. It's what they do for a living.
Yeah, and it all comes down to what success looks like at the end of the day as well, doesn't it? In terms of, that is success in one perspective, having a big social media following and drawing a big crowd and, potentially making lots of money. But if that comes at the expense of being with your loved ones and looking after your health, then renders it somewhat meaningless, I would say.
Absolutely. Well, yeah. And then again, that comes back to values again. It's about what your values are in life, isn't it? And, I know for me, my family is my priority. And my family isn't just my children. It's I've got a wider community of family that are really important to me. So in that sense, I know you feel similar as well, don't you? About
yeah, for sure.
And I think that makes a massive difference about what it is that your priorities, and other people don't have the same priorities, and recognizing that too.
No, and I didn't. I mean, before COVID, my priorities were completely out of whack. I think we are encouraged to have the wrong priorities these days, and you have to almost go against the culture to slow your life down.
Because there's this whole, social media is not help with that, because you've got everybody showing their sort of their best life or their fake self, I suppose, that might be all high flying and amazing, but then you're not seeing the realities of what they go through to achieve that. But also you get people that they fake it till they make it type thing. And everyone's different, aren't they? Everyone's got different views and different ways of doing things. But certainly I think since COVID, we've just become more of this sort of society where, you don't necessarily prioritize the right things, but perhaps you've learnt to as a result of COVID.
Yeah, I mean, COVID was a complete leveler for me and completely changed my life in many pretty profound ways, really. And as we start to kind of normalize, because I think it has taken quite a long time to feel comfortable about saying that, there was this rush to return to normal in 2022, and I don't think most people were ready to return to normal. I mean, that was 2022 is when I first got COVID, and I think a lot of people, the world opened up a bit, and then suddenly we were actually impacted by this thing we'd avoided for so long.
Yeah.
And then 2023, I guess, was the first year in which this pandemic was really not considered a threat and wasn't dominating the news anymore. But it came at a time when suddenly we were hit with the cost of living crisis and the next big threat. So I don't know that anyone's really had a time to, properly process, because it feels like we've gone from one crisis into the next. But I'm trying to hang on to kind of the revelations I had in, mid 2020, which I think a lot of us had. I think a lot of us were, a lot of eyes were opened up, I think, to how we didn't want to live anymore. And when we had that period, and I'm talking about the first lockdown, the core one, the the hot one when we had nice weather for March to
The
July
nice
period.
lockdown.
Yeah, which I really struggled with a lot of kind of depression and anxiety during that time after losing my job. But equally, I do have some very special memories from that one. And I think most people kind of came away from, no matter how we muddled through it, a lot of people have come away from that with some big kind of life perspectives that they encountered during that time. It's trying to hold on to that. It felt like we were given that one moment where we could pause. Now that life's got just as busy as it was pre-pandemic, can we return back to those ideas that we had and live in a different way? And that's what I'm challenging myself to do every day. And sometimes succeeding, mostly failing, but trying.
So what are some of the things that you sort of changed that perhaps you did before 2020 and you now sort of take with you on a daily basis?
Well, the key one. So
of course.
It's really not. It's there's lots you learn along the way, and it's of course has as many challenges as employed life. But being self-employed is brilliant. Having the ability to actually flex your day and to a degree take on the kind of work you want to do and not do work that you don't want to do is a wonderful luxury. So that was the first thing, like actually self-confidence and building up my own business and saying, right, I'm going to double down on my purpose and what I'm passionate about and trying to build a business around that. The other thing's just being a lot more present really with my kids. I mean, I think I was just such a classic kind of weekend father before COVID. I was, I was out from 7:30 in the morning till 6:30, 7 at night. And that's pretty standard, I think, for a lot of working professionals who have to commute somewhere. It wasn't that I had a long commute; it was just when you're reliant on trains and stuff, it becomes long. And so I'd see my son for 10 minutes before leaving, and I'd try and get home and do his bath and bedtime if I could, but that was it. And just being present a lot more with the kids has been wonderful. I think it's slowed me down. I think it's calm. I mean, not always. I say it's calmed me down. Certainly hasn't always been the case, but there are moments when, to give an example, yesterday my little boy was ill. Going back to employed life, that would have been a real problem. 5 years ago, that would have been me saying, well, I can't, this would have been me 5 years ago. I can't possibly, not go to my very important job at short notice. And I was saying to my wife, you'll have to take the day off. That was unfortunately the very traditional dynamic that she weathered for a lot of years and my family weathered. It happened yesterday, and that's just the classic kind of, oh, well, what have you got on? Okay, you've got those appointments. I've got these later in the day. Fine. I'll sit with him in the morning. I'll work in the afternoon. And just switching my phone off and spent the morning under a blanket watching Wallace and Gromit films. Like, that's precious time with a 5-year-old. And then I worked in the afternoon and no harm done. So just learning to be there when they need me more.
Yeah.
And then not feeling guilty, like when I need to work late in the office or work at a weekend, because that's the thing about working for yourself is your working patterns do go out the window. No matter how much you might say, I'm going to rigidly stick to core working hours. The reality is the flexibility of self-employment also comes with the need sometimes to work hours that other people don't. But I think as long as my family doesn't suffer, then I'll work whenever, it works for them really. So yeah, I think it's generally been pacing myself and trying to do work that I'm passionate about. Have been my two kind of COVID takeaways. How about yourselves?
So, well, I was going to ask back though. So, from that, I'm just picking up on something that you said about your mental health. Has that now improved your mental health? Would you say by being a bit more self-reliant, recognizing the needs of yourself and your family, and being able to actually fulfill them?
Yeah, I think it's two things. I think it's one is I've to a degree realigned my life to support my family.
Yeah.
But also it's recognizing the fact that, I genuinely do suffer from anxiety and depression.
Yeah.
And they were two things that I did not ever acknowledge in 2018, 2019, which I would say were my rock bottom periods.
Yeah.
I would never acknowledge that I needed help. I'd seen counsellors, and but I could never really do anything beyond having a few conversations with counsellors. It felt like I was just digging myself further and further into a hole. And it was only after I hit my lowest point in that 2021 lockdown, which I think, I mean, I have a lot of friends whose marriages broke down in that
Really?
the third lockdown. My marriage, almost ended during that third lockdown, and that was when the wheels came off, and that was when I, went to a GP, and I went to a CBT specialist, and then I went to a GP and did the test, and they said, yeah, you're chronically, depressed and anxious, and you need medication. And going, yeah, I do actually. I can't fight this anymore. I do, because my life is a shade of grey, and I don't want it to be anymore. And it shouldn't be, because I now have all these things that I said I wanted, and I'm still not happy. So I think that for me was a journey I had to go on. I almost had to. It wasn't like COVID happened and I set up my job and suddenly everything was better. It got a lot worse before it got better. And I think it was when I started taking medication and acknowledging the fact that I have anxiety and have depression, and that is actually part of my being. Because now I recognise that, and I structure my days around it. And I work in a little studio all on my own, and I have the ability. Sometimes I might just come in to the office and brew a coffee and sit and read my book quietly for an hour. Because I know that if I don't do that bit, I'm no good to my clients. So sometimes, I will push deadlines and I will move things around because I know what my mental well-being needs. Sometimes I'll just go out for a walk just to get myself in a better place. So I think I used to have to. You can't do that when you're employed, or certainly you can't when you're in an industry like public relations, where you're supposed to always be really jolly and really creatively fired up and always on and always ready to kind of react to whatever happens in the news. It's really hard to take that time for yourself. And so I think I've tried to realign my life around who I am and recognize that I'm always going to be living with anxiety and depression. Those things are not going to go away. I just have to spend the rest of my life managing them as best I can.
And answering your question, which was how has COVID changed myself? I think I enjoy my home more. Being at home. Yeah. Working from home, being at home, just, yeah. And I think it probably just changed some of my attitudes towards the pressures of work, really, similarly to you. I haven't had any mental health problems as such, certainly not in the my current life, but it does impact on you. It impacts on it, being at home with COVID. And I was one of those people that stayed at home to keep themselves well, because I've got a condition that I had to still have the condition, obviously, but it's done me a favor. It did me a favor, and it gave me permission to stay at home. Whereas before, I'd be in the office all the time. I'd be in the office from 7 o'clock in the morning till sometimes 8, 9 o'clock at night. So it's been a really good thing for me. Really good thing.
And do you have you got like a home office that's separate from the rest of your living space? Because I think that's
no,
one of
I'm
the
the only
key
one here. I'm the only one here, so it's fine. Okay. Dave's out and about doing his own thing, and I'm kind of in here. So I have got a room that I can go into if I really want to, but I don't need to. I've absolutely got my own space here, which is lovely.
Yeah.
I'm really lucky.
I think for me, it's probably quite similar, actually, in the sense of I enjoy my own home more. I now travel a lot less than I used to for work. I mean, I used to go to London probably a couple of times a month, and I actually can't remember the last time I went to London now. And all over the place, going to see people and clients. And I think one of the big takeaways for me from COVID was this whole ability to Zoom and have Teams conversations with people. That this all existed before. It was just that people weren't confident enough, or didn't understand, or didn't want to do a video meeting. They wanted an in-person meeting. And I've still got a couple of clients that are like that want to meet in person. But it is such a big change, and it just means you can do more in the day. I think I'm probably busier now than I was before COVID, but because I don't have to travel as much, it's so much easier to do more, which I'm really grateful for, to be honest.
Sorry, I remember before COVID hit and meetings and things like that, and I always used to say to people, can you do a virtual meeting, please? No.
Yeah.
Absolutely nobody would do virtual meetings. And I'm thinking, I've got to travel an hour and a half to get to you.
Yeah.
It's going to take me, we're going to be in a meeting for probably an hour, if that. And then I've got to travel an hour and a half back. What is the point of that?
I actually think now it's flipped completely, in that now when someone asks for a meeting, it's almost 99% of the time it's online, unless they specify that it's in person, which I think is great. I think that transformation is brilliant.
I do. And going back to what I was saying at the start, I mean, I now run, 2 podcasts where I'm interviewing people from all around the world.
Yeah.
And the only thing I have to be flexible on sometimes is my own time around time zones.
Yeah.
It's incredible. What I do for part of my living now, I couldn't have done 5 years ago, and I feel really blessed about that. But the ability to create content and have really deep and meaningful conversations with someone who's in Texas or Australia or India or wherever it may be in real time is amazing. And it isn't a substitute for if the three of us were sitting around your table now, which would be the preference. But this is a great case in point. If we had done this in person, that would have been my entire working day spent getting to and from yourselves. I always go back to there's a day about 10 years ago that always sticks very sorely in my mind, where I had my grandfather, who I was very, very close to, had just passed away. And the very next day, when I should have just said to my boss, I can't go to work, I can't be here, I need to be off, I sucked it up and I went on a 8-hour round trip to Manchester for a 1-hour meeting. A meeting that really not much happened in it at the end, and it didn't progress much. And I remember travel woes. I saw all having to be suited and booted for this meeting, and it taking a long time to get there and getting back furiously late. And for a meeting where we just basically looked through some paperwork together.
Yeah.
In my old PR job, I used to travel overseas for 3-hour meetings and overnight stay, and then come back on the red eye that night. All of these things, but just it wouldn't happen now. You just wouldn't. No one would do that meeting. So for me, I think this is amazing. As long as we don't lose touch with, that key thing that we did notice in COVID, which is actually the joy of the human touch and human connection, actually how nice it is to shake someone's hand, to hug someone, all the things that when it was taken away from us suddenly felt like such an infringement on our civil liberties. And if I had an opportunity to do all of my podcasting in a studio and invite people in like you two do, I would, because the conversation is always going to be richer if you can shake one another's hand and sit on a sofa together. Of course it is. But I'm very grateful. Someone who's trying to work in a tight way around my kids and ideally work, a 5-6 hour day if I can, rather than a 10-hour day. I'm really grateful that actually it's a click of a button to have most meetings now.
Yeah, it does make a massive difference. I think the only time where I think I've personally noticed that it's not as good, and is noticeably not as good, when you're presenting to people, especially a large number of people. If you're sharing your screen, you've got a presentation up, and maybe you've got a little window of a few people's faces. You just don't get the same feel or when you present to someone in a room, especially when you're trying to sell something, you might say something and you notice them smile, or you notice them shake their head in agreement. You can then work with that, and you can go, oh, I'm going to tell you more about this now because I can see you're engaged. But I've found personally that it's virtually impossible to do that on a Zoom or a Teams call, especially when you've got a large number of people.
Yeah. I agree. I would counter that, Mike, by saying that I have done a lot of PR pitches in my time of PowerPoint decks, 30, 40-minute presentations where you are just hit with the poker faces all round. It's like everyone's there ready. So actually, even though you can see their faces, there are multiple times in person, but it didn't really add to the narrative. So, I mean, for me, as someone who has, I've realised that quite a lot about my self-confidence and about how I present. And podcasting, I feel very, very comfortable and confident with this. For one to one, or in this case 2-1, it's like a apprentice interview here. But this kind of dynamic feels really comfortable. So I'm actually quite comfortable presenting. I can present to 50 people. I've done AGMs and various things virtually, and I don't mind because I can't see them. This actually works much better for me than if I were in a room doing a presentation.
Really?
So it's personality types. I think there are, for some people who are, I'm a natural introvert who's good at through social media. I'm a real extrovert, but actually in reality I'm someone who really only does well in one-on-one conversation. So it does play to some people's strengths. But I think we've just got to be mindful of the fact that the world is back now, and it's fine to do a combination of both. I think so. Hopefully this year will be the year when people feel a little bit more like normality has returned, but hopefully a nice normal and not the normal where we were all completely overwhelmed and at the end of ourselves in 2019.
I think you're right. I'm starting to see more requests for in-person meetings, and some of them I'm doing, and some of them I'm trying to suggest politely that I think it's actually better to do it remote, for numerous reasons. But also, I think what you said about it's about time to get back to normal. I think you're right there in terms of people traveling and generally, going abroad, going to see people more often and doing things again. I think that is very much coming back now, which is great.
Do you know that what though? I think I hear you. I don't know. I've got mixed emotions really, because I love the idea of being around people, and I love the idea of meeting people, and I love the idea of that, touch and everything that goes with it. But I do sometimes feel that I don't want to put the energy into that, and sometimes I think you get drawn into what other people want more so, or I certainly before used to get drawn into what other people want before I thought about my own needs. I don't. If I don't want to go to a meeting, I don't go to a meeting. If I don't want to sit on the phone for an hour and a half with somebody, I don't sit on the phone for an hour and a half. And I think prioritizing what's important to you is really important for your mental well-being now. And I think sometimes, I know I'm very fortunate in the position I'm in, but I don't. I almost want to say I can't be bothered. That sounds awful. I don't mean it the way it sounds. It's just like, actually, do you know what? My time is really, really precious, and I want to put it where I want to put it. It's like I love doing this with you. I absolutely love it. I love spending time with other people. I love just chatting and having that opportunity to share our space with other people. I love that. Do I want to do it? I wouldn't want to do it all the time, but I do really enjoy doing it. I think it's a really nice thing to do. But some things I don't want to do, and I'm not doing them anymore, and that's it.
No, in my experience, podcasting is a really special place. I mean, you guys launched yours around the same time I launched mine. I remember having the conversations with you when you were thinking about this idea, and it's just opened up so much for me. I mean, it's a lot of work. I think people that don't podcast don't recognise how much goes into creating the content and publicising the content and getting it out there. But I have made some real friendships and real connections from people that have been guests on my show. And, people that I really respect, and authors and athletes and entertainers, and then people from my community and friends who I've got to know completely differently through asking them these questions. And I wouldn't change it for the world. I wish I'd done it sooner. But
where do you draw
I wasn't ready.
Sorry. Where do you draw your people from to interview? Who do you do you just approach them?
Well, it's easier now that I've got two, because one is now that one is very niche. There is a very large large pool of people I can approach that I know or I know who know of people who know of people. For good journeys, it's probably 50-50 between people I actively approach, like people I see in the news, or people who've got a book launch coming out or a tour in or whatever it might be, where you know that they'll be on that media schedule, and so you try and plug in at that point. or people who I come across in life and business, and who I go, I think you'd be really interesting. I try and, what I try and do is think ahead and think what would be an interesting hook to this particular conversation. So, for example, I've just interviewed a chap, and it's been all about citizenship in 2024, and whether this year will be the year when we take a different approach to being citizens rather than consumers. I'm interviewing a guy who is like an absolutely prolific YouTube star, and I'm interviewing him about what success looks like to him now that he's here to, 500,000 subscribers or whatever it may be. Has that made him happy? I'm trying to like find people where it is. When I started doing it, it was almost like I wanted to try and get someone's life story in an hour. It was like how many questions can you ask someone? Now I'm much more focused on what's the one takeaway that someone could have, and build a conversation around that.
Yeah.
I think it helps, like you guys have found, by doing it lots. I think most podcasts die within 10 episodes. Like it's actually very rare to find a podcast which has lasted more than a couple of years, because people go in with best intentions, burn out due to. I find that Instagram generally seems to be the one social media channel that majority of celebrities still hold it quite tightly as something they look after themselves. So yeah, I've had some really, really big guests specifically from reaching out via Instagram. But again, it's like, I guess it's the skills I've learned from. It's like the evolution of what I've been doing for a job, because one of the things you're taught to in PR is, it used to be the phone pitch. So it used to be one sentence grabbing their attention so it wouldn't hang up on you. Then that turned into the email pitch. Can you get your whole story across in 2 sentences? And then all the stuff's obviously below, but you've got to grab someone in 2 to 3 seconds before they delete the email. So this is the logical next step. It's like, can I convince someone to give their time up to be on a podcast that they've never heard of? And that's about the famous television personality. And I contacted her about bereavement, because she had lost her dad in 2021. I lost my dad last year, and I said, I saw this video you shared. I'm really struggling with this. I think it'd be really valuable to record an episode where we talk about the challenges of grief and losing a parent. And that was it. Immediate reply. Yeah, I'd love to. Because it's about, I think, at the end of the day, people go onto podcasts because they want to have conversations like we're having now. They want to actually come away from it having a conversation that's value to their time. It's not a transactional thing whereby you just make a media appearance like it would be if you were, I don't know, appearing on the One Show or something like that to plug your product. It is a real investment of time and energy. And I think it's about being respectful of that, and saying to the person, I understand you've got limited time, but if we have this conversation, it will be, quite special for both of us. And that's what I've tried to do.
I think that's a really strong point there, because something that Rogers says, Carl Rogers, he's one of my heroes really in some of the written work that he's done. And he says one of the most important things in any therapeutic relationship is the relationship. And it's not about, whether you're paying me or you're not paying me. It's about the relationship. And I feel quite strongly about the fact that I have relationships with people. I could charge people to come and see me, but I don't, because I have a relationship with that person, and I want to have a relationship with her. And it's a little bit like the podcast, as you said. It's that having relationships. We've been recording all day today, so we've had some incredibly different conversations with different people, but also there's been some similarities, and they're quite strong similarities, but also you come away emotionally engaged with that person, and they're emotionally engaged with you. I mean, our conversations could go on for hours if we allowed them to, because there's so much to talk about. We're quite strict. We say an hour, and that's max, because it's not fair on that person. We know they're giving their time free of charge.
But also it's about the listener as well.
Yeah,
It's got to add value to the listener.
But I think that only happens because you're sat there, and you're at that moment in time, you're having a relationship with that person.
Yeah,
you're listening, you're caring, even if something that you say that you don't agree with somebody, you're still, it doesn't matter. It's about being human and
sure,
and being part of that. And I love that. I absolutely love it.
And I also come down to the view that you can have people on again. Like,
Yeah,
so I go back to
we
some of
do.
the mistakes I made. One of the first interviews I did was with this guy who, you know, the wrestler I mentioned, who was
Yeah.
a former gladiator as well. So back in when it was on the Sky
Which
One
one was
reboot.
he? Which one was he?
He was Oblivion in
Oh,
the
right.
gladiator.
Okay. Yeah.
That was in the Sky One reboot when they did it. But I kind of we recorded for almost 3 hours because I
Wow.
was literally like his whole life from growing up to the whole thing, and I was determined to get it all down. And you know, bless him, he did the whole thing, but he must have
Wow.
been so tired and thinking,
Yeah.
is this guy ever going to stop asking questions? You know, you don't need to do that. You 45 minutes an hour is fine. You do it. You
And that's,
record
to be
another one
fair,
again. You know,
and that's what we do. We tend to get to about 45 minutes and then have like a 5-10 minutes of people sort of doing telling us about what their plans are for the year and sort of self-promotion. And then we finish it there and invite them back in you know, a year's time or something, because, you know, everyone's got lots of things that they can share, but also it's about spacing it out.
Yeah.
You know, I guess it's also a bit like a story. You get a hook in, and someone's going to tell an exciting story or thing that happened in their life, and they're always going to have more than one thing to tell. And it's always nice to bring people back to talk about the next thing that happened, or the next
so
thing they're working on.
That's what I'm planning on doing, is at some point doing recap episodes with some of those early guests. Now I know a lot more about podcasting. I know a lot more about the ways to do it in a way that is very natural. One of the things I've learned a lot about is the value of silence and just letting sound bites breathe and not interjecting myself in that. I think because I do a lot of cutting things down into little clips and reels and, you know, trying to break an episode down into lots of pieces. I've just learnt the fact that actually if you're quiet as the podcast host and you just don't interject too much, some of the stuff that you get is incredible. I think there's too much in conversation where we all kind of want to just jump in and get our own viewpoint across. And I've learnt a lot about just sitting back and just letting the conversation breathe and letting the guest take it where it needs to go.
And I think everybody has a story. You're so right about that. I mean, it's something that I learned, obviously, as a counsellor and therapist, that, you know, the silence will very often bring you more than you ever expect. Keep your mouth shut. I have a habit of doing this, and it's a habit that I adopted. I've got my finger over my mouth, or I'm doing that, do something. Because I think I just adopted that. You've pulled me up for it before, haven't you, when you've said to me, and I think it's just something that I've done to remind myself the importance of listening.
Yeah, counsellors are great at that kind of uncomfortable silence, aren't they? Where you're there in a chair and you think you finished and then they don't say anything. They don't say anything for 5 seconds or 10 seconds. And then you start saying something else because it's getting awkward. I think there is an art to that, not just in the world of podcasting, but just in business and in life. Just you know, actively listening a bit more. And that's something for me, as you know, at school I was pulled up for being a chatterbox and, you know, distracts others, and you know, and I'd love to see some of those teachers now and be like, look what I do for a job. But you know, I do talk a lot, and I talk a lot when I'm, you know, I talk a lot when I'm nervous or when I'm hyper, but sometimes just taking it slow and letting the other person speak is golden. But it's interesting in a podcast when you hear good podcasters who do that. It can be quite uncomfortable and take a bit of a shift as a listener, because if you're listening to an audio podcast and suddenly it's silent for 3, 4, 5 seconds, you're like, what's gone on? Has the feed broken? Has my phone died? And it's a real adjustment. I think there's a you know, because on radio you never have dead air. I think there's an adjustment, but podcasts aren't radio. This is a very different form of content that we just so happen to listen to. But these are, you know, this is deep conversations, and these are real conversations, and those conversations are often messy and chaotic, and that's what makes it wonderful.
Yeah, and they work really well. So what's your kind of your plans or your goals of your podcast, both of them, for this year? Have you got that planned out?
Not really. No. a little bit.
That's good.
No, I mean, I've got a pipeline of who I want to speak to. I mean, I won a couple of awards for the Good Journeys last year, which I was really pleased with.
Amazing.
Because for quite a new podcast to get some public recognition for that was awesome. And that kind of ticked off that bucket list bit, really. I think I have significantly surpassed where I thought I would be in terms of the guests I've been able to speak to already. Like, I feel like I've jumped about 3 or 4 years ahead in terms of some of the guests I've had on. But that hasn't necessarily translated to reach. It's interesting. Some of the biggest guests have had the smallest audiences. Some of the smallest guests have had the biggest audiences. So very quickly, I changed my tune to it's not about the names you get on, it's about the conversations you have.
Totally agree.
I think for me, it's just slowly building that audience. I'm a big believer that, if you keep building, then over time, you'll get where you want to go. And I don't know where I want to go with it, but I know I want to still be doing it in 5 years' time. It might not still be a podcast. Who knows if podcasts will still be a thing? I suspect they will be. But I still want to be having deep dive conversations with people from all walks of life. I think the wrestling one has got real potential to make a real impact. There's not many podcasts like mine out there that are focused on, I call, the tagline of it is real talk from real talent, because it's all about the real life stories. It's not about, tell me about this time you did this or this or this, which most wrestling podcasts are. So I think that has a potential to hopefully make a real positive difference in a space that is probably a bit misunderstood. As for Good Journeys, I just want to keep having it as a platform for inspiring other people, really. And then, every so often I get the chance to interview someone. Like I interviewed Sir Terry Waite a couple of months ago, and if you told me 2 years ago that I'd be recording a podcast with Terry Waite about his life, more to the point, if you told me 2 years ago I would record a conversation with Terry Waite, and I would have never believed you. I think it surprised me how quickly I felt quite comfortable in the role. And again, I think it's because you're inviting people into your home. Like, even though I'm doing it virtually, this is still my environment. You do a lot to set up and liaise with the guest beforehand, that I feel like by the time you meet on that screen, I already know them quite well.
Yeah.
But that was very special. I mean, if I'd stopped doing it tomorrow, to know that I've recorded, an episode with Terry Waite and dedicated that to my dad and had that experience with him, would be more than enough. But hopefully it's something. The challenges obviously with podcasts and our monetization, and it's it's an expensive thing to do, and getting that return back on what you invest in it is quite challenging.
Yeah.
So I have to balance that out, being a small business owner. How much time I can invest in it against the day job. But I just think it's about continuing, much like you guys are doing, just continuing to be there, keep being present, keep having good conversations.
And I think you've got a really important point there, because the monetization, in a sense, is paid back through those important conversations, isn't it? You get so much more back than you do actually financially lose, if that makes sense. And I always feel that's a good thing for your mental health. It improves. There's nothing nicer than sitting opposite somebody that you've engaged with, and you get some, we've had a really good day today. I think it's been really lovely. We've had lovely people on here today. It's not saying we haven't in others. We have in others as well. It's been brilliant. We've been so fortunate. And I've never ever thought about money. And I thought I would pay to do this. I would pay, if you see what I'm saying. And I've been approached.
I think I do pay to do this. I would go as far as that. I would say, the reality is of how much I've invested from my own business money in creating 2 podcasts. I have basically been paying to do this for 2 years.
Yeah.
And
I hear you.
Which is wonderful, but also my hope, so to say 2 years on, might be that actually the pieces are much more cost neutralized. I work with a wonderful company who are one of the partners for my show now, so they've helped through advertising to cut back on some of those costs. But it's definitely, I mean, if I were, the amount of time I spend podcasting and preparing for podcasts or editing podcasts or promoting podcasts, if I were to plough that all into PR and copywriting work, we'd have far more money as a family right now.
Of course.
I look at it long term in terms of what this opens up, not just not financially, but in terms of what it opens up, and also what it's opening up for in me. As in, I'm so much happier since I started doing this, because I feel connected to people.
Yeah.
Which is
And
really good.
yeah, so you can't
Yeah.
really put a price on that. But also my hope is that, you know, I am a freelance PR person and copywriter, and it's quite clear from all my social channels that's what I do. And my hope is that it will all start to come full circle at some point, and some of the people listening or the guests I have on might go, "Oh, that was a good one. That was good. He knows what he's doing. Maybe we'll see about working with him." So there is a bit of a strategy, but as new biz strategies go, it's it's not really an ROI deliverer. It's much more just a return on experience rather than internal investment. I think is probably the best way of explaining it.
So if you gave anybody any advice, what would your first bit of advice in life be? Anything.
In
Nothing. It
life,
doesn't have to be podcast. It can be anything. It can be about podcast. It can be not about podcast, whatever.
just don't try and don't look too far ahead into the future, because it's futile making plans, really. And I think, I spent so much of my 20s and 30s planning ahead for what life would be like now, and life is nothing like I thought it would be, and in many ways it's so much better. Just don't make plans. Short-term plans and goals are great, but just remember that you don't really have that much control over anything in life, and you just have to kind of go with the flow a bit. And I'm not someone with anxiety. I'm not great at doing that, but I'm trying to let things be a bit more and just go with the opportunities when they come my way.
You kind of answered my next question, which was, have you found that that's helped your anxiety by not projecting?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I still have periods where it's tough. Going through a financial crisis. It's been a really, really hard time for everyone I know who runs small businesses. Has found the last 6 months the hardest they've ever been in business. And when you have anxiety, of course, I will worry about things like the cost of paying my rent and the future of my business and what happens if I lose this client. And you can spiral into that kind of worry circle. I think what I'm better at doing, this is probably a combination of mindfulness and medication, but I'm better at kind of I'll go down the tunnel, but then I can get back out quite quickly. I can go, okay, you've brain dumped all your thoughts, fine. Is that going to happen? I'm better at kind of rationalizing things, but I still do it, and I probably always will. And with that comes a bit of self-acceptance to go, well, I am what I am. I'm a warrior. I've always been a warrior. I probably always will be a warrior. However, if I look at my track record and what's happened in my life, did I need to worry about most of things? Not really, because they've all worked out fine. So I think there's a little bit, maybe as you get older, it becomes easier. Like I'm hitting 40 this year, and I think that kind of feels like quite a milestone in terms of I feel like I certainly don't know the answers, but I can look back a bit more at the path of my life and go, okay, well, that worked out okay. That did in the end. That went in a weird direction, but it's like me doing a wrestling podcast now. I was writing a wrestling magazine when I was 10. That's what I wanted to do when I was 10, was to be a wrestling journalist. And I'm doing it. It's just taken me 30 years and 10 jobs and all sorts of routes to do it. I think, if I'd had a plan to do what I'm doing now, it would have never happened. It's happened because I had lots of lived experiences, some of which were really painful, which have put me in a position to be in now. And, I'm in a position through my podcast, I can talk to people quite openly about mental health struggles. I can talk to them about grief. I can talk about, fertility challenges. And I've had quite a lot of dark periods in my life. And I have lessons that I've learned from all of those. So that gives me the ability, I think, both as a podcaster and hopefully as a human being as well, to just have a bit more empathy and awareness of other people, because I've lived a lot of things, as I think we all have. And if I can hopefully help to help someone else get through a similar situation, then it's worth it, isn't it? It's like what you both are doing.
Absolutely. Concur. Absolutely. And there's a lovely saying in AA, and it's, we only keep what we have by giving it away. And I do think, if we share our knowledge and we give our knowledge to other people, then actually at the end of the day, the chances are you might save somebody from having to go through quite as much trauma as you went through, but also it might help somebody to actually come out the side of their trauma that they're in. And it
I wish that
reinforces that. Sorry.
All of the conversation that happened in, say, April to June 2020 about everyone having a mental health crisis and how hard everyone was feeling. I wish that had been a thing 12 months earlier when I was feeling completely alone, like I couldn't talk to anyone about being depressed or having anxiety, because suddenly it became the zeitgeist and mainstream conversation. And I was like, that was how I was feeling a year ago, and I couldn't talk to anyone about it. So there's real power in conversation. There's real power in shows like you're putting out, and hopefully what I'm putting out as well, in terms of, if you connect with, the podcast, you're speaking to an audience of one. If you connect to that one person and help them take something positive away, then you've done your job.
And it's really nice that you say that, and I ditto, because I feel very often some people, I'm not saying all people, but don't feel they have the permission to say it. And it's giving people permission to be able to say, do you know what? It's a struggle today. It's really hard. And it's okay for it to be really hard. I mean, similarly to you, I'm obviously grieving at this moment in time. And it's like, God, I wake up some days and I don't want to talk to anybody. I do, but I don't want to,
No.
And it's that part of acceptance. It's about accepting people for who they are rather than for who you want them to be.
Well, do you know what? I don't know when this episode will go out, but I'm going to my first bereavement support class tomorrow. I lost my dad 7 months ago, and I am nowhere near getting my head around it. Most days I want to pick up the phone and give him a ring, and I can't get my head around him not being here, and I can't get my head around things I wish I'd done and said, and the fact that I never can anymore, and I can't do it on my own now. And I saw at a local cafe that there's a bereavement support group starting tomorrow near me, and I thought, well, that's really out of my comfort zone, but I need to do it because I can't repress these feelings. I need to speak to someone else who's lost a loved one and probably cry with someone, to be honest, because I haven't done that since last June on his deathbed.
Wow.
And I need to cry, I think. And I don't know that I can even begin to move on until I've started to do that with other people. Grief's awful, and I have a strong faith, and I have a strong belief in where my dad is now, but that doesn't help him not being here now with me.
Yeah.
And
and it's great that those groups exist, and
yeah,
the community wants to help the community. So
it is. I don't even know who set it up, but I saw it was there, and I thought, well, I'll go along, and we'll see. I don't know, but it's one of those flying by things where I think it was there. It's on a day when I'm not working. I thought, well, that's a sign. I should follow this sign, and
absolutely.
Who knows if it'll be a one or done, or by the time this episode goes out, it will have been a huge support blanket to me. I don't know, but I recognise the fact that I can't. I kind of took a month off work after he passed away. Was doing a few bits and bobs, but was quite vocal on social media telling people this has happened, and I'm not going to be working for a while. And it clearly wasn't anywhere near long enough. I kind of came back and thought I can just got the funeral out of the way, and then I was like, right, I can get back into work mode now. And I haven't really been there for the last 6 months. I think I've creatively, from the outside looking in, business has done well, won lots of awards, launched a podcast, blah, blah, blah. But in my head, I haven't really been there since last May. And I want to refine my, my focus. But it's hard when you lose someone that you're close to and who you want to share. A big part of me has always been sharing those moments with my family. And but then also balancing that out with being a dad myself. And, I've lost my dad, but I am a dad of two, and they need me, and I need to be there for them. So, and they're sad because they lost their granddad. It's hard on all fronts, and
of course it is.
You just kind of work through it however you can.
Well, hopefully the group that you're going to go to is will provide useful and again, it's all about connections, isn't it, and support and things like that. And hopefully that you meet some great people.
Well, they're doing it in a nice coffee shop that does excellent cakes. So if nothing else,
Brilliant.
That's
That's the payoff.
It's not going to
That's
be
always
wasted
the
time.
win.
Yeah.
And it's been absolutely lovely to spend time with you. Really enjoyed it. Thank you so
Thanks
much for
me on.
having us, or for coming, I should say. Both wise, it feels.
And we'll get you back again soon.
Yeah, for sure.
I'd love that. Thank you for the invite.
No, you take care. Thank you very much.
See you soon.
See you soon.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.